Welcome back now at 7:44. Are retirees in America facing a retirement crisis? According to a recent survey from Clever Real Estate, 64% of retirees believe the U.S. is in a retirement crisis.
The main trust fund to pay for Social Security benefits is expected to run out in 2033. And when combined with the disability insurance fund, the outlook gets even worse.
Number of Americans living paycheck to paycheck is increasing, pushing back the goal of retirement. That study from Goldman Sachs found that 39% of Gen Z, 45% of millennials, and 41% of Gen X describe their financial situations.
The money is expected to run out partly because of the wave of baby boomers retiring and a new law that increased benefits for millions of retirees.
65%. That's how many Americans right now either know their retirement savings are completely off track or have no idea where they even stand. That's not my number. That's the Federal Reserve's number, published in their own 2024 report on household well-being. And here's the part that should genuinely alarm you.
According to Bankrate's 2025 Wage to Inflation Index, Americans are earning 1.2 percentage points below the rise in the cost of living over the past 4 years. So what does that mean? In simpler terms, that means the average employee's pay increases over that time have not caught up with higher prices.
For the Americans who actually have retirement accounts, the ones who did the right thing, opened the 401k, contributed when they could. The median balance sitting in those accounts is $87,000. The financial industry says you need over $1 million. The Federal Reserve says most people have less than 90 grand. That gap isn't a shortfall. That's a chasm. And today, I'm going to show you exactly how we got here, why the standard retirement advice is broken, and what the data says is actually coming. Let's get into it. Let me start with the elephant in the room, because the financial planning world has been selling a very specific story for decades now. Save early, invest consistently, let compound interest do the work, retire at 65 with a nest egg north of $1 million. It sounds clean. It sounds logical. And for most Americans, it is mathematically impossible. The Federal Reserve's survey of economic well-being found that among all working-age adults, when 65% report their retirement savings are either not on track or they simply don't know if they are. And of those who do have dedicated retirement accounts, the median balance is $87,000. Now, to be fair, that median includes everyone: younger workers who haven't had decades to accumulate, people who started late, people who had setbacks. That's true. But even when you isolate the generation that should be in the strongest position right now, Generation X, the people aged 45 to 60, AGU, who have had their entire careers inside the 401k system.
The media keeps telling you that Americans are richer than ever. The market is peaking. 401k is the future. But here's a truth that very few people want to say. Half of Americans over 55 don't have enough money to live for 6 months if they stop working. They are not lazy. They're not stupid. They've worked for 30, even 40 years, and are still living paycheck to paycheck.
The numbers are devastating. According to the Schroders 2025 U.S. Retirement Survey, the average Gen Xer expects they'll need about $1.1 million to retire comfortably. But they project they'll only have around $712,000 saved by retirement. That's a $405,000 gap. And only 16% of Gen Xers believe they've saved enough. Let that sink in for a second. Generation X was the first cohort to go through the entire American workforce without traditional pensions. They were the test subjects of the defined contribution experiment. The 401k was supposed to replace the pension. And after 30-plus years of data, we can now say with certainty the experiment failed its first full generation of participants. And it's not just Gen X. The boomers, who had at least some pension exposure early in their careers, still project a $357,000 gap between what they need and what they'll have. Millennials, a $354,000 gap, and they haven't even hit their peak earning years yet. But here's the question everybody wants answered. Why? If Americans know they need to save, if the tools exist, if the advice has been screamed from every financial rooftop for 40 years, why is the savings rate collapsing?
I was like, oh, 37 years until I retire. I could do this. I don't have a savings account. There's hardly anything in my 401k. I'm not retiring.
Have to work until we're 67 in order to receive full benefits. But they've blessed us with the opportunity for increased benefits if we work till age 70. Most of our patients are gone by age 70.
The answer is not laziness. The answer is not avocado toast. The answer is a term Goldman Sachs coined in their 2025 retirement report, and it's called the financial vortex.
Numbers from Lending Club Bank show 61% of people across the U.S. live paycheck to paycheck. It's not just low-income or middle-class families. High-income families are living paycheck to paycheck, too.
Goldman Sachs found that 74% of younger workers actively struggle to save for retirement because of competing financial priorities that are all hitting at the same time. Student debt, childcare costs that rival mortgage payments, healthcare premiums climbing at 2 to 3 times the rate of wage growth, housing costs that have gone vertical, and an emergency fund that never quite gets built because something always breaks first. Translation: it is mathematically impossible to simultaneously pay off student loans, cover $2,000 a month daycare, absorb 8% annual healthcare inflation, keep up with rent or mortgage payments, and max out a 401k. The math doesn't work, and Goldman's projections show it's going to get worse. They estimate 55% of workers could be living paycheck to paycheck by 2033 and 65% by 2043. Now look, I want to be honest here. Not every financial struggle is systemic. There are people who genuinely overspend, who prioritize luxury over savings. That's real. But when you look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics consumer expenditure data for 2024, the picture changes completely. The average American household spent $78,535 last year. Housing costs alone rose 3.3%, on top of a 4.7% increase the year before. For families in the bottom income quintile, we're talking about households pulling in less than roughly $30,000. Their total annual expenditures hit $35,046. That's survival mode. There is zero mathematical room in that budget for a 401k contribution. Zero. Move up to the second quintile and you get $50,054 in spending. That's paycheck to paycheck.
Many households are still gloomy about their personal finances. A new survey from Lending Club finds that 60% of Americans say they're living paycheck to paycheck. Many are blaming the stubbornly high prices when you go to the grocery store or for housing and for rent.
The third quintile, the actual middle class, spent $66,900. And this is where the retirement fantasy completely falls apart. Because basic living costs, basic DOS, are consuming everything these families earn. And here's what really tells the story: the Fred personal saving rate.
I am a teacher in St. Louis County, Minnesota. Since the price of eggs, bacon has gone up, we've done a lot more cereal.
That's the official measure of how much disposable income Americans are actually saving. Dropped to 3.6% by December 2025. 3.6%? Financial advisors tell you to save 10 to 15% of your income. The entire country is saving 3.6%. That's not a behavioral problem. That's a structural crisis. And one Reddit user on r/Gen X put it more bluntly than any economist could. They wrote, "I'm 54, and I will never be able to retire. I'll be working the day I die." That's not an outlier. That's a sentiment echoed across thousands of posts on every financial forum on the internet. So people can't save enough. That's problem number one. But here's where it gets worse. Because even the money people do manage to put away is being cannibalized before they ever reach retirement. And BlackRock's 2025 retirement survey found that 57% of American savers are now willing to raid their retirement accounts in an emergency.
Contrast to a Bankrate study finding fewer Americans believing their savings will grow in the new year. Researchers found the highest number in nearly a decade, a third of those surveyed expecting personal finances to get worse. In 2026, the costs of health insurance, electricity and utilities, food, and yes, housing are all expected to rise. You guessed it.
That number was 33% in 2020. It nearly doubled in 5 years. In plain English, that means more than half of Americans with 401s, Ks, are treating their retirement fund like a savings account, pulling money out, paying early withdrawal penalties, destroying decades of compounding interest just to survive the present. That's not planning, that's triage. And then there's the healthcare bomb. The Medicare trustees report projects that Part B costs, that's your physician and outpatient coverage, will grow at an average of 8.8% per year over the next 5 years. Part D, your prescription drugs, growing at 7.1% annually. Meanwhile, overall GDP growth is projected at just 4.2%. Healthcare inflation is running at roughly double the pace of economic growth. That means even if you save responsibly, even if you do everything the financial planners tell you, healthcare costs in retirement will devour your nest egg faster than you can draw it down. And this isn't speculative. Fidelity's widely cited estimate says the average 65-year-old couple retiring today needs over $300,000 just for healthcare expenses in retirement. $300,000. That's on top of housing, food, transportation, and everything else. Now, to be fair, and Medicare does cover a significant portion of healthcare expenses for seniors. Nobody's paying $300,000 out of pocket for a single hospital visit. But the coverage gaps, dental, vision, hearing, long-term care, those are the silent killers. And premiums, copays, and deductibles add up relentlessly over a 20 to 30-year retirement. But perhaps the most devastating data point in this entire investigation comes from the Employee Benefit Research Institute. Their 2024 Retirement Confidence Survey found that workers expect to retire at a median age of 65. That's the plan. That's what the spreadsheets say. But the actual median retirement age, it's 62.
70 years old. I live in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I cannot afford to retire. I live off of Social Security, which does not pay all my bills. That's why I'm looking for work.
50% of retirees retired earlier than they planned, and nearly 70% of those early retirements were forced, not by choice, but by health crises, physical decline, or corporate layoffs. In other words, did the advice to just work a few more years assumes your body and your employer will cooperate, and for half of all Americans, they won't. One Reddit user on r/retirement captured this perfectly. They were being forced into retirement within days and wrote, "If I lose a huge chunk of this money to taxes, I will not be able to get the monthly income I need from it and will be forced to work until I die. All I want is to enjoy my remaining years after 50 years of work and a hard life." 50 years of work, and still terrified of running out of money. That's not a personal failure. That's a systemic one. And meanwhile, Social Security, the one safety net most Americans are counting on, pays an average of $2,181 per month for retired men and $1,780 for women. That's barely above the federal poverty line. And more than 57% of elderly SSI recipients rely on Social Security as their primary income, with only 1% having any earned income to supplement it. The trust fund backing these benefits is projected to be depleted by 2033. After that, without congressional action, only a portion of scheduled benefits will be payable. That's not fear-mongering. That's the Social Security Administration's own actuarial projection. So where does this leave us? Let me give you the honest range. Best case, Congress acts on Social Security, healthcare inflation moderates, and workers who still have 10 to 15 years before retirement aggressively increase their savings rate. In that scenario, the crisis stabilizes for a subset of Americans, mostly higher income earners who have the margin to course correct. Realistic case. The majority of Americans approaching 65 in the next decade will face some combination of reduced benefits, higher healthcare costs, and insufficient savings. They won't be destitute, but they won't be comfortable either. Working part-time in retirement won't be a choice. It'll be a requirement. The EBRI data shows this is already happening. Worst case, if healthcare inflation continues outpacing GDP growth, if the Social Security Trust Fund is not addressed, and if the personal savings rate remains below 4%, we are looking at a generation of Americans who will be functionally unable to stop working, ever. Goldman Sachs projects 65% of workers living paycheck to paycheck by 2043. At that point, so the word retirement becomes a historical artifact for the majority. So if you're watching this and you still have 5 to 15 years of earning power ahead of you, here's your move. Look at your actual savings balance today, compare it against the Schroders gap numbers, and build a realistic drawdown plan, not the fantasy version. Talk to a fee-only financial planner, not someone selling you products, and understand that Social Security is a supplement, not a retirement plan. Here's the truth. 65% of Americans are not on track for retirement. The median retirement account holds $87,000 against a projected need of over $1 million. Healthcare costs are inflating at double the rate of economic growth, and half of all workers will be forced out of their jobs before they ever reach the retirement age they planned for. If you're 5 years from retirement and wondering whether you've saved enough, this data should be your wake-up call. The Schroders numbers and the EBRI forced retirement data tell you exactly where you stand. If you're already retired and watching your purchasing power shrink month after month, the savings rate collapse, and healthcare inflation numbers explain precisely why. If you're in your 40s trying to save while drowning in competing expenses, Goldman Sachs just gave a name to what you're feeling, the financial vortex, and it's not your fault. Ich komme davor. If you're helping aging parents navigate Social Security and Medicare, the average benefit numbers and trust fund projections in this video are the context you need. And if you're a younger worker wondering whether any of this will exist for you, the 2033 timeline is the number to watch. I'll be covering Social Security changes, Medicare enrollment traps, and the insurance crisis that's hitting retirees hardest every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. Subscribe to Why with Harlan so you don't miss the next breakdown. Thanks for watching.